innovators. I'm Todd and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guests today are Nolan Browne and Diana Fisler. Noel is an innovative expert, entrepreneurial, executive, investor, fundraiser, and board member specializing in the commercialization of emerging technologies in a host of different areas. And Dr. Diana Fisler has served the building materials industry in a variety of roles over the years, most recently as building science and innovation leader at John Mainsville. Welcome to the show to you both.
Thank you very much.
We're glad to be here.
Excited for it. Well, I like to start by how you got into the industry to begin with.
You want me to kick it off? I'd be glad to. Many years ago, I spent far too many years in school and ended up accidentally with a PhD. And a friend of a friend said that Johns Manville was looking for a glass chemist. They're a fiberglass insulation company. And I thought that might be interesting and fun. And then before I knew it, I was in the construction industry. And I spent a number of years in research and development, exploring various aspects of that building materials company. So it was a series of accidental decisions that led me to having a passion for innovation in construction materials.
That's awesome. I love it. I'm a happy accident into construction as well too. So it's a good way to get into the industry.
I guess in contrast, I was very decidedly engaged in this particular industry. I don't come from the industry. I came from, after graduate school, I was a solar person. So I helped build solar factories. And what I recognized over the years, first from the solar industry, and then by kind of looking at the market data, was that a lot of what is going to happen most likely in construction has happened in these past industries. And we can really, my mission always has been energy efficiency, clean energy development and innovation. And buildings construction is the biggest opportunity in the world to have an impact on that. So that's kind of why I targeted into here. And why I've teamed up with Diana, who actually has been doing this for a long time, so she can bring, she can.
I only wish I had been that deliberate, Noel. That's a beautiful story. I was lucky rather than smart.
Hey, it takes both. You got to have the smarts and the luck. Timing's everything. That's really interesting, Noel, coming into the industry with that vantage point. What's something from those other industries that you think construction can learn? Like if they could pull out one thing from those industry and implement today, what should they be looking at? That's
a great question. And there's a lot of different things. If I were to summarize, if I pull out one thing, I mean, just a high level attitude is something that is really important to consider, right? The great industries of yesteryear that we had that are no longer, they never thought they were going to go away. They never changed. They became complacent, and they either look very different today or they don't exist here in America anymore. So the solar industry is one of the ones that pretty much doesn't exist anymore. It just poof, vanished, and it moved offshore. And my family's from Detroit originally, and so there's another kind of catastrophic industrial policy mistake where we decided, we're not going to worry about imports. We're not going to do those things. We're not going to introduce new changes to our manufacturing lines. It's not what we're going to do. And poof, the international markets had a really brutal way of whacking us upside the head, and a lot of people are still paying for that mistake to this day. And then if you look at companies like, there's all the history is littered with these companies like Kodak, right? Who invented the digital camera, one of the biggest companies in the world, one of the most innovative companies in the world, spun out of MIT back in the, I think, 20s and 30s. And they went bankrupt in 2012 after they were on top of the world and were the hottest place to work for 50 years. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, in the construction industry, we have become complacent, right? We've done things the same way for a very long time. And there's reasons. Complacency isn't just about, making a mistake. It also is like about regulation. It's about lawsuits. It's about you kind of start doing things a certain way because the industry becomes change resistant by the way it's engineered to some degree. They're encouraged to be, right?
Right. Actually, it's smart. Actually, it's smart business to be, right? Because they get better and better at the way things are.
Right, exactly. And so within that incremental innovation and incremental improvement that they're doing there to optimize what they're doing right now, you start to kind of lose a lot of the big kind of discontinuous wins that could actually open up, like digital photography was, right, for the industry. And so that's what we start seeing today. If you look across the ocean, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about offsite construction, right? Offsite construction changes the paradigm of the concept of construction, because up until today, or up until recently, we always thought about a building site as being, people and materials on a piece of dirt, and you build a structure on it. And that's just not how it works anymore with offsite construction. And that trend that you see coming with offsite, it's kind of like the trend that Kodak probably saw when they started inventing the digital camera and started seeing people were starting to pick it up slowly but surely. It's a long time coming, but it is coming. It's a tide that's going to be it is a big deal already. It's going to be a huge deal in 10 years. And if you're going fighting against that tide, you're probably going to regret it 10 years from now.
Yeah. So if the industry is kind of encouraged not to change based on kind of the structures and the systems that are in place, how do you encourage that change and to really change a mindset and philosophy and structure? Because you're trying to avoid that Kodak problem.
The Kodak moment, yes. So how do you encourage change to happen? And I've worked on the boards of several companies before, and at the board level, you're always stuck with this conundrum of, hey, we have a great operation going. Hey, we have to make our numbers this quarter, right? And there are these new obvious opportunities, right? And the people very often who see those obvious opportunities are the very same people, right, who will get cannibalized by them. Because they're on the leading edge of a lot of this stuff. So I guess the watchword here is when you see an obvious when you see an opportunity, like something that you think is going to be a big deal, you want to basically start really putting resources into it to see how you could develop that a little bit more. Because in my opinion, innovation is all about solving old problems in new, more efficient, more effective ways. If you do that, you're innovating, right?
Yeah.
And so we should always be, doing our mainline business, because that's what does the day-to-day. But we can't stop evolving, and that's what innovation brings to a company. It keeps you healthy by evolving, and it costs money to do that, right? But it costs a lot more money in the long run not to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, from your vantage point and the research that you've done, what is the state of the construction market? And then what's kind of the role that you see industrialized construction playing in that here at the start of 2022?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody kind of knows that industrialized construction is still a very small fraction of the US market. And what I've been kind of fascinated by, though, is, Noel was saying, like, poof, the industry changes. But that's only true in retrospect, right? When you're in the middle of the poof, it doesn't look like a poof. It looks like a series of pressures coming. And so that's what I'm seeing with industrialized construction. There's a lot of things that are coming together. There's this workforce crunch that is huge. Everybody you talk to in the construction industry is like, I can't find workers, I can't find skilled trades. People are delaying projects because of lack of available workforce, right? We've got increased pressure on the supply chain because of various factors, including pandemics and weather events. And all of those things, I think, are leading us to sort of a poof moment, that that Noel was saying, but it's really hard to see when you're in the middle of it. So I think that's where we're at. I think we're at this nexus where we're going to see increased adoption of industrialized construction. And I want to kind of make a point here, which is when people think of industrialized construction or modular, they tend to think of volumes, blocks, boxes being put together. But there's actually a lot of incremental steps on the way to that. There are like combined trades and closets and panels and, steps on the way to industrialized construction where we start to do things more like manufacturers and less like artisans. And that's what I think we're seeing. We're seeing it in manufacturing, we're seeing it in software, we're seeing it in project management, and we're seeing it in business models.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the kind of that poof moment and the time of poof,
the time of poof, we should trademark that.
Is the mix of kind of the catalyst of the change? Well, what's the mix between being reactive to the pressures of the industry and then being proactive of this is where the industry is going and this is where I'm going to steer the company and put these things in place to set us up for success?
Well, it's interesting. Hang on, Noel. I'm gonna hand over to you. I tend to be a very incrementalist, so I'm always a fan of small changes, like putting a little bit of time into innovation and dedicating a little bit of resources. So now I'm going to hand it over to Noel because he's an advocate for recognizing that more disruptive change is necessary or possible.
I think, my perspective on it is that you need to be innovating every day. It's small, continuous disruption every single day. And that grows, it becomes a culture. That's what makes a company successful. Once you move into a reactive mode, you're already in trouble, right? Because those discontinuous moments, it's hard to predict when they're coming, and they're countervailing to very often to the cycles, economic cycles. So if you look at the solar industry in the United States, the manufacturing industry, just before it got wiped out, it was making all-time sales highs, and everybody was minting money, and everybody was sold out for the next 3 years. And when you transfer that model over to where we are right now in construction, looks kind of similar, right? It's like Diana and I just got back from the International Builder Show, and we were meeting with a whole bunch of folks, building products folks and developers, and everybody's like, talk to me, after we're not backlogged for 3 years. Like, we're sold out. Why do we need to innovate? And I guess my point is, by the time that need to change something is really obvious to everybody, to the point where they're bleeding, you can't do incremental change anymore, or incremental change. You can't basically suddenly just turn it on. It's hard to do that. You can't
react at all because it's already too late.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the first camera, for example, to stay on the original analogy, the first camera that Kodak produced was, I believe it was 1975, the first digital camera by a Kodak engineer. And it was 1991 before they introduced their camera to market, right? And theirs wasn't the first to market. So they had it on the shelf for 17 years or 16 years. And then they only introduced it because someone else came in. So Kodak wasn't playing to win the game. They weren't playing to change the industry. They wanted zero disruption, and they just wanted to participate. They didn't want to be left behind. They had the FOMO. But the problem was that by the time they really were like, okay, this digital thing's a big deal now, you already had a couple big leaders in there, and that were way far ahead. And so you just have to kind of have to walk down this road where you're always kind of changing things a little bit all the time.
Right. Yeah, you can't play it too safe. There's a great line that I heard a while back that I've taken to heart of, you have to disrupt yourself before disruption disrupts you, and take that proactive stance. Disruption is a fact of life. It's going to happen. It's going to be unpredictable. But if you're seeking, how can I find those improvements? Where can I, to that incremental change component to it, how can I build that in as just part of our DNA of a company? Then when the big disruption moment comes, you're able to be agile enough to deal with whatever that unexpected cost is.
That's right. And it's as much as it is a technology thing, it's also just a human resources thing. It's you're training your team to be able to deal with this type of stuff. And we've done this successfully with a number of clients that we've worked with in the past. So, one of the first clients I did this with was in the construction sector. So the Stoke Corporation, building materials, building products, multinational. They're headquartered out of Germany, and we had an innovation committee. So I was actually a board member, and an innovation committee had been set up, and I was asked to lead the innovation committee. And over a series of of a 10-year period, when I was doing this with them, I think we were able to evolve the model to figure out how to take innovation from being something that we give like quarterly updates about, like the world is changing and shouldn't, isn't that cool, to how do you kind of create a little team. We had an innovation committee and a team that worked all year round, and we would just kind of meet occasionally to talk about what are the key things that we should be looking at over the next quarter, and how do you keep moving that ball a little bit forward. And what starts happening in the organization is that new information and those new solutions start inspiring the people who touch your team. Like, so you started seeing, it was the executive folks who were working on the team, but as some of the work kind of got out more into the general population of coworkers, people were excited. So like, hey, this is great. We're doing things in a new way. It also meant that you had leadership interfacing with some of the people on the floor who had these new ideas, and so there was more kind of engagement and communication, and it was a really awesome thing to see. And it's that type of thing, in my opinion, that not only gets you set up on the technology side of the coin, but also you're cultivating the team that you need to be successful in the future.
I just want to give not a contrast to what Noel said, but a compliment to it. What people sometimes see, though, is that innovative efforts get squashed, right? Like you said at the very beginning, in the daily pursuit of the main business. And so the ideal outcome is that the whole organization begins to become innovative. But one of the things I've been studying is, how do you nurture a baby innovation in a big corporate? And, I've been looking for examples of when that's been successful. And my appetite for it was first whet at Johns Manville, when the model was to nurture little baby businesses. And so this is sort of another model beyond, if you can't quite disseminate innovation throughout your organization, one way you can do it is to dedicate a few resources to it and to protect them fiercely, and to nurture a new initiative, or maybe even sometimes outsource that new initiative when you've identified something really strategic. So I just wanted to share that as sort of another way to do it. If you haven't yet reached the critical mass, which you nicely did at your previous board role, of being able to get everybody kind of to share in the innovative approach, one thing you can do at the very beginning is skunk works it, right? To nurture something that is important.
Yeah, I would say that's a theme that you got to do actually in both cases, right? Because we were actually firewalling off projects as well, and making sure that they had a team behind them. In fact, the creation of ADL Ventures, the company that we work for, was in part kind of impacted, or at least motivated by creating a project team that could work in parallel with the main team in the company, so that there was always somebody pushing the ball ahead. The biggest problem that I've noticed in most companies that try to that understand what they want to do and try to innovate, is that it's hard to keep the effort going, because it isn't your everyday business. You get fired for not hitting your numbers. You don't get fired for not having an idea most of the time. Mm-hmm. And so you get fired for taking risks, but you don't get fired for doing what was done before very often. And so there are these heavy disincentives right? To keep that ball rolling after your innovation meeting, and you have this new strategy and you're really excited, everybody's inspired. And then you kind of go back on Monday morning and it's like, okay, let's do what we always did, because that's what we do. And we have to hit our numbers, right? That's the number one priority anyway. So I found that I guess back to your point of what's the number one thing a company could do to be innovative, make it someone's job to be innovative. And if you don't have a dedicated team that's doing innovative stuff internally, make sure you're working with somebody externally who's going to push that ball ahead for you and interface with your C-level folks.
So would that be kind of the low-hanging fruit there, develop kind of an innovation incubation team internally?
Yeah. So it really is like having, like what we had at Stowe was the innovation committee, and we had like a little team supporting that at ADL. I've seen, we've worked with folks who basically have that entire team internal, and they build it up and they keep it going. Some companies are better at doing that than others. Some companies have more resources than others to do that. So, but that's a really important thing to be consistently doing. Because as Kodak demonstrates, right, in the analogy, it's not enough to actually invent the digital camera. You can invent the digital camera and still lose.
Right.
Lots of brilliant researchers.
You got to take action on it. You can't just have a thought. You got to take action.
You have to take action.
And well, that's true everywhere, right?
That's true.
And from that, I like this story, not just because I'm a tech geek, but because it's really interesting. The other players in, like, Fujifilm was actually Kodak's competitor, big competitor. And Fujifilm started a partnership with Xerox, actually, which I thought was kind of ironic, because Xerox was one of the companies also that, Xerox PARC kind of fumbled the ball as well, right, on innovation, even though they were an innovation unit, right, at a big company. They went out and they invented effectively, like, the graphic user interfaces, like they invented Windows. They basically, a lot of modern computing is predicated on all the stuff that Xerox PARC did. And it's just amazing that, you have these companies that did such brilliant work, and then going that last mile to implementation and disrupting their own business. It just becomes a really, really hard to do for a lot of people, because it's very unintuitive to do something that hurts you in the short term, because it's going to give you long-term gain.
Yeah. So bringing it back kind of into the construction context, when trying to embrace that made for factory mindset in construction, where do you see most people struggle?
So Diana's gonna have some very interesting perspectives on this too. The biggest struggle I always see is that people think about the process of creating a structure for someone to operate or live in, and they think about building a house or building a building, right? And they think about what they've learned in terms of, you go to a job site and then this happens and that happens. There's an order. There's a process that has been finely tuned over the last 100 years of how it gets done. And so stopping that, like saying that, imagine that, you're an alien and you fly to Earth and you have the resources we have today, but you don't know how to build a house. Your job is to figure out how to build a house. You would not build it the way that we normally build it. You'd not be constrained by the way we used to do it. You'd basically look at everything objectively and say, here's the most efficient way, here's the fastest way, right? And those may look very, very different, like, than building does today. And there's going to be obvious commonalities. I mean, we're talking about boxes with roofs on them, right? But at the end of the day, let's talk. I mean, if you think about building materials, right? On one hand, I think a lot of buildings products people look at me and they'll tell me, no, there's not a whole bunch of new stuff that we need. I mean, it's all going to be the same whether you use it in a factory or not. And that's probably not true. I mean, maybe half of it will be the same, but a factory setting is completely different than a field setting. You don't have rain in a factory. You don't have weather in a factory, right? You also don't, it's also a constrained environment where you can do a lot of techniques and processes that you can't do in a field. You can't use a UV light in a field to cure, polymers, right? But you can do that on a factory floor. Yeah. And so if you're on site and you have people moving pieces of material around, there's a maximum size it can be. It can't be the size of a tractor trailer. It has to be like a brick size. A brick is size of the brick because a person has to pick it up and bricklay it, right? But what if you become unconstrained because you're in a factory setting? What does that mean for sizes and quantities and packaging and everything, the products and how you go about assembling something? So I think that's really the paradigm that people kind of have to think about, is like, if we're changing the fundamental process of what we're doing, what does that mean, right? Because I mean, I don't have a superhuman like insight as to exactly what the best way to do it is, but there is a better way to do it, and that's where the innovation comes in. You go out and you change it a little bit and change it a little bit more, and you figure out what works over time. And before you know it, your new thing looks a lot different than your old thing.
Mm-hmm. Diana, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, I like to hit on just a couple points. I mean, one is totally echo what Noel said about many of our procedures and our materials are designed not just around the last 100 years, but around hundreds of years, right? The size of a brick is because craftsmen hundreds of years ago found those convenient to handle. And we still, I think, have a very artisanal approach. I think I used that word in the beginning of this podcast, to a building, right? We're crafting a building. And I think that the future is toward manufacturing a building, and that I'd like to see us move that direction. But then there's a couple of things that you didn't touch on, Noel. One has to do with the way that the systems beyond building materials are now all built to reinforce the way we're currently building things. We've got a lot of efforts around codes and zoning that we're doing with some partners in the Department of Energy, looking at the way that those codes do not encourage moving toward a productized or manufacturing type of mindset for the materials and the parts of buildings. We still think of it as a process rather than a product. And making that change in mentality is what's going to be necessary, I think, in construction. Because as we've already hammered pretty hard, we think we're in the poof moment of the opportunity for disruption in the construction industry. So those are two things I wanted to talk about, specifically around this idea that all our systems are now optimized for the way we currently do construction. Codes, the way the supply chain is set up, logistics, delivery of materials, sizes of materials, are all in this minimum, local minimum, like an energy minimum of the best way to do things given certain assumptions. But if we change our assumption to a manufacturing and product-based assumption, all of a sudden a lot of things have to change. And you know, we're right there trying to help people to get to the point that we need to be, because we don't have enough buildings, we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough labor. It has to change now. So that's what I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
Noel, do you want to respond? Okay, Todd.
Go for it.
I was going to say, I think you're dead on there, and I think it is changing. I mean, the poof has begun, right? You started seeing. It was back when Citizen M was building the hotels in Manhattan, right? So all these prefabricated hotels, luxury hotels, modular, were coming on in from Polcom, I believe. So a Polish manufacturer was doing the East Coast stuff, a lot of stuff on the East Coast in hospitalities. And you started seeing a lot of institutional stuff like dormitories and going up. I think UC Berkeley did something. There's something down in San Diego, I think, as well. And that was a Chinese supplier. So you're seeing that, you know, the first inklings of us offshoring the industry, right? And that's what it will look like if we don't want to. I passionately feel, and it's been something I've been working on for the last 5 years now, but I'm trying to get the industry to play together nicely, American industry, because we've fallen behind in this particular sector. And, you know, developers are going to at some point give up on trying to buy locally, and they'll just hire whoever can get it on their doorstep. And if they can have to ship it from China, and if the numbers work, they're going to do that. And we need jobs in America. Like, construction is one of the last bastions of, you know, kind of the backbone of the American economy, jobs. And for me, that's an important thing we need to keep here. So let's not offshore our building industry, because that could happen.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and bringing into the conversation with codes that you were mentioning, Diana.
Right.
There's some pretty sizable kind of systemic barriers with really creating the groundswell of this change that is outside of construction. So you have codes and the government regulations of how a building's built. You got all the supply chain issues and craziness that's going on now as well too.
Right.
So what can be done to help kind of push the need for change out into all those other areas, so that it's not just the builders that are wanting it, but that they're also able to then influence all these other stakeholders and different aspects that are involved in the process? So
Noel, I'm going to segue into the ABC Collaborative now.
I figured you would, yes. Go for it.
So one of our partnerships is under a DOE program with RMI, used to be the Rocky Mountain Institute. And Nolan was the initiator of this, proposal that we're now actively bringing stakeholders together under this program funded by the Department of Energy to talk about this, to say, we've identified these major barriers to innovation in the built environment. Mm-hmm. And, since it is funded by the DOE, it has a strong bent towards energy efficiency. We shouldn't be wasting so much energy in our buildings, but it also has relies strongly on a pillar of offsite construction. Industrialized construction is important. So, we're partnered with them to look at what's the problem? What are the things we really need to attack? Codes and testing is one of them. Workforce availability is another. Offsite construction enabling that supply chain is a third. Risk and finance products is another thing that needs to be addressed. Not all of them are optimized for a product and industrialized manufacturing approach to the way we do construction. So that is one mechanism. It is not the only mechanism for addressing these systemic barriers, but it is one.
Yeah, I would add to this by saying, when you ask what people should be doing, it really depends what their role is in the industry or in the sector. So, I mean, if you're a building product manufacturer or kind of an industry head in the supply chain, you should be thinking about like showing leadership, right? You should be thinking about going to where the ball is going to be during the good years. Like right now is exactly when you should be making your investments. You're sold out. So these are the fat and happy years. You don't have to stress out too much. You don't have to worry about sales. You don't have to worry about marketing. It's all going to take care of itself for the next couple of years. So right now, you should be putting a lot of effort now into, okay, let's figure out what the next building materials are, for example. So going back to that one example I was talking about, there's going to be like an offsite product portfolio that is optimized for offsite manufacturing, for manufacturing in a factory. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist yet. And if you go out there and you say who makes offsite products, there are no distributors who are the offsite distributors. There are no manufacturers who are known as the offsite manufacturer. There are no machine producers either. It is a completely nascent industry really at this point. And so I'm an advocate of like getting people to go and say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be the building product. I'm going to be the distributor that aggregates all of the offsite building products and puts them together, and we build that brand. Or the building products manufacturer who says we're going to basically develop a line of products specifically so that we are more competitive in that market. We're solving the problems that the factories have as opposed to the on-site workers. Mm-hmm. And so that's really important as an industry player to think about how to invest during the good times, so you're there when that Poof moment happens. But there's the others. Well, Diana was talking a lot about codes and regulations, and those are really sticky and really important. If you can't work that out, it makes things way more hard. One thing that we can learn is, if you're a regulator in the system, let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's study what everyone else did. And there are a lot of countries who have done this successfully, to be honest. Like the British actually did this really well. At some point, they decided not that long ago that industrialized construction, that offsite construction was really important for their country. And so since the government basically builds a quarter or a third of the buildings, right, in Britain, they were like, well, if you want to ever win a government contract, you better be able to use BIM and do this and do that. And so they set the infrastructure for everybody that they had to follow in order to win government projects. They kind of built it in there so that automatically added it to the system. And using the same type of organizational cohesion, the government can also start looking at the regulatory regimes and say, you know what, here are some laws, or here are some regulations that are really handicapping the industry. So we're just going to strike those down and see what happens.
Yeah.
Or change them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if you could innovate something in the industry, what would you choose to innovate?
Do you want to go first, Diana, or should I?
I think you should go first. I want a minute to think about that.
I have a lot of ideas. One of them, I won't tell you like that this is the best idea I've got, but one of the more interesting things I see is a space in the market for aggregation of offsite projects, right? So, for example, and I've worked with a couple folks, a couple large owners, builders who have said, hey, you know, we built like 20 hotels, like prefab, and honestly, we don't see it. We don't see the savings you're talking about, or how it's not going up that much faster. Tell me why. And you're like, okay, so how many times did you build the same hotel? And then they'll look at me like, what do you mean, like same hotel? And I'm like, well, that's the problem, right? Industrial manufacturing is about producing the same thing over and over and over and over again. So you got to basically treat it as if it's a manufacturing project. And that's why offsite construction will not be the answer for all construction ever. That no one's ever advocating that that's how it should be. There'll always be some things that should be custom buildings, right? But a lot of things don't have to be custom. So like hotels don't have to be custom most of the time, hotel rooms specifically. Developments, tract home developments don't have, in fact, they're not generally all that unique, even when they're built on site. So there are areas where quality and luxury will trump out like the need for people to have a little things different from their neighbor, right? If you have a nice place rather than a less nice place that's unique. So I think that's, so I'm sorry, I'm way off track, but the big idea here is what is the invention that you need so that you can interface with the owner, right? With these people who they want to build 400 hotels, and they know they want to do it offsite. And there's a world of software out there. That's not really the problem. It's not that there's software. It's how do you basically build something on the front end that enforces that process of figuring out how to modularize something in a disciplined way, figuring out what that means in terms of its component parts. Go from BIM to BOM. So be able to cost out, like if I change this, what does this change in terms of price and time? And I think that's something that isn't invented yet. And it's not a straight up software app that plugs into an ecosystem. It's a little more complicated than that. It's a combination of software and hardware. Mm-hmm. That's, I think if we could build that would change the industry.
Nice. Dana, how about you?
Well, so Noel definitely talked about demand aggregation and, standardization, which I think is really important, but I actually want to go even wackier and talk about what I want to see change is the philosophy around the way we do things is the way we have to do things. And the question that I always try to ask is, what does my customer actually want? So like somebody who commissions a building, somebody who wants a home, what do they actually want? Because what they want is not all the things that you've developed to deliver them that solution. What they want is a home, right? They want a place to be, they want a comfortable place, they want a place to do their business. And when you start to break it down to what they actually want, you realize that many of the ways you've developed to deliver what they want are not really value add. And so stripping it down that way, I think, gives opportunities for innovation. I know that's really abstract, but I think every time you break down your business and the customer that you serve to asking what they actually want rather than what you want to sell them, I think there's opportunities to innovate. And I know that's not as concrete as what Nolan said about demand aggregation and standardizing hotels, but that's where I think a lot of innovation can be uncovered.
Yeah, I more than agree. I think you need both. I think you have to innovate in your mindset first before you can really innovate practically and with, bring it into the real world. You got to change that mindset first.
That's right.
Spot on. Well, how do people find out more information of what you guys got going on at ADL and connect with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a website. It's adlventures.com. You can always contact me or Diana, and we're always happy to chat. I'm Noel at adlventures.com. Diana is Diana at.
I'm literally up for a conversation about any technology and any clean tech.
So yeah, I would say that, when it comes to ADL Ventures is about helping companies build new ventures through this innovative structure that we've set up. So if you think about so at a high level, ADL Ventures is a mission-driven for-profit company that helps corporates build new ventures. And we focus in clean tech space. And more specifically, we focus on smart cities, right? The intersection of construction, utilities, and transportation. That's our wheelhouse. And in those areas, those industries account for 90% of CO2 emissions in the world. So those are the areas you got to address. These are also the three heavily regulated industries that are very change resistant. And there hasn't been that much innovation in these industries compared to others because they're change resistant by design. They're supposed to be not just rapidly changing everything, and because there's safety issues, there's codes and all that stuff. There are important reasons why you can't do that. So we focus on looking at companies in those industries who want to launch new innovative products, or we work with folks who have figured things out. Maybe they've created a whole bunch of IP, like the Kodak, like the Kodak folks, right? They've got the digital camera, but they don't know what to do with it. It's stuck. So we'll help them launch that. We'll build it into a new company for them. So we do two kinds of things. We'll take a piece of a great idea that one of our partners has or one of our corporates has, and we'll turn it into a company and we'll spin it out. Or we will go and we will understand a real problem they're trying to solve, and we'll build a company for them, either to supply them or for them to buy as a business unit.
Nice. Well, I got one last question for both of you. What does innovation mean to you?
I'll go first. I'm just going to repeat what I said a minute ago. It's understanding the true need of a customer and then figuring out in what ways that need can be satisfied. And it may not be the way you're currently satisfying it. No?
I would say that innovation is solving old problems. And they tend to be older problems. They can be new ones, but you're solving old problems a new way. It's a more efficient way, a more innovative way. And when Diana talks about like knowing the customer, that's a precursor to innovation. You cannot innovate unless you know what you're trying to achieve. What problem you're trying to solve, right? So those become critically intertwined things. But let me point out what innovation, in my opinion, is not. because I think a lot of people make this mistake, right? Innovation is not marketing, right? It's not, innovation is not customer service. Those are vital to having a successful business. You got to do them well, but that isn't the innovation part. That's the precursor for defining what the problem is so you can go out and solve it. And it's the solving the problem a new and innovative way, more efficient, more cost effective, more faster, or whatever. That's the innovation. Those are the bolts of lightning when somebody is looking at a process and saying, hey, if I did it this other way, it would be better. Well, let's see what happens. That's the innovative spark.
Both great answers. Thanks so much for taking the time. I got so many more questions that we could dive into, but this was awesome. Thanks for coming on and unpacking innovation and industrialized construction.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks so much for having us on.